Hello everyone. This is Namernan, and today I will be doing a video talking about the recent monotype tiering survey that was put out. Now, I was actually going to make an entirely different video today, talking about my normal team that I got a really high ladder peak with and almost cracked 1600 with, but this tiering survey came up and I would be remiss to not at least kind of do a video talking about this. And I couldn't really mix it with the normal video without it being, like, weird pacing-wise and also topic-wise. So I decided I'll just pick up two separate videos and I'll release the normal video sometime later. But with that being said, is another survey for monotype. So that means we're going to have to answer probably the same questions. Metagame enjoyment, how balanced it feels, and overall frustration and satisfaction with certain Pokemon. So, yeah, unlike last time, I think I'm actually going to start with the suspect Pokemon first, because this question kinda feels like the question I should be answering at the end and not so much before answering these. So I will be doing that. But yes, the first question is the main elephant in the room, Gliscor in the current SV monotype metagame. So Gliscor is a really complex subject, because if we look at the MPL stat sheet, we can see that... Oh, is this being updated? Every single time I'm on this thing, it's getting updated, but yeah. As you see, Flying, which is the main type Gliscor is brought on, did not perform very well despite having a high percentage of games. And this is relatively, like, not good for the type to have, because most types are supposed to have like a 50... An acceptable win rate for a type would be 50% roughly. But Flying is like way below that, and it has over 20 games, which is really bad, because that means it's winning less than 10 games. 10 of the games that it was brought in. So of the 20-ish games that it was brought in, it lost... it won less than 10 of them, which is not good for a type like that. So, and similarly, Dragon also is slightly underperforming, but that's because everyone was prepping like mad for Dragon, so that's at least slightly more understandable. But I think because people were prepping so much for Dragon, they also subsequently prepped a lot for Flying, because Flying and Dragon both have severe weaknesses to Ice-type attacks. And also, Flying also caught a lot of wind because of trying to counter Full Corona and Fire as well. So, yeah, just a lot of stuff just casually breaks down Flying teams very well. But as we have seen in those MPL games, it's still a very strong type that takes a lot of patience to get through. And you do have to prep intelligently for it as well. Not to say that people are not good at prepping for Flying, because like I said, a lot of stuff on normal teams that you will bring in a tournament setting, that will just naturally be, or naturally have tools to deal with Flying and its mons. Because usually the archetypes of Flying that usually catch people off guard are the ones with like unusual mons, like Galarian Moltres, for example, or they use like a certain core differently. So they use like a different offensive combo with Dragonite, for example. Like, for example, we saw the Bolt Beam Dragonite, that one game which happened to be against another Flying team. That ended up saving me a lot of time having to watch another possibly 500 turn game, but... yeah. I do think, and this is all... Talking about Flying is very important when we're talking about Gliscor, because Gliscor is one of the core mons on the type. And the reason why it's as obnoxious as it is because of the mons on the type. Now, Sandless Ground can make Gliscor work as well, but it is nowhere near as oppressive, or it's nowhere near as obnoxious to deal with on ground compared to Flying. Because Flying can cover its weaknesses a lot better, than ground can. And even though Sandless Grounds teams do typically tend to be stally, they're much easier to break through, and that's why they haven't been like super common in MWP or MPL. they have shown up, but they are not super common. And that is one of the main reasons, is because it's much easier to break through than a standard flying team, because of the mons that you have access to. So with that being said, what does this mean for Gliscor? Gliscor is, once again, I think, a necessary evil to have in the metagame, because if for those of you who don't remember what SV was like when it started, like around 3 years ago, it was like an extremely offense-heavy metagame. Like, games were going by really quickly, and it was either swept or be swept. It was an incredibly offensive metagame. There wasn't really a lot of balanced metagames, or balanced teams that were able to perform very well. I mean, of course, Stallwater is going to work, but even then, it was still really difficult to make any other team archetype work, because offense was just so strong. And in my opinion, and this is going to be opinionated and not based on a lot of facts, in my opinion, I believe that Mons is best played when it's a balance v balance. Not to say that other archetypes aren't allowed to be viable, but I think when the default archetype is balance v balance, I think that is when Mons is at its most healthy. And as much as we hate it, Gliscor is one of the Mons that allows this to keep happening, because it's the amount of defensive qualities that it brings to flying teams just makes it so that flying doesn't just completely shatter, and it also makes it so that you have to respect flying in the builder as well. Because not being able to break Gliscor means that you can't get away with running, like, some not very strong offensive breakers, which means that you are incentivized to bring those breakers, or to bring at least some sort of stall breaking. And you want to know what types of teams really like having breakers and stall breaking? Those would be balanced teams. Now, offensive teams like those as well, but they have a harder time fitting those types of mods onto their teams. And before, in like 3 years ago, you wouldn't even need to worry about it at all, because there's just nothing that could really stop you from doing your offensive nonsense. Now, granted, 3 years ago, we also still had stuff like Excalibur, King Gambit, Espathra, and a bunch of other broken stuff, right? But even in the current metagame, I still believe that Gliscor is a necessary evil. I know it's extremely obnoxious for a lot of people to deal with, and it does stop certain strategies from working, but I do think that if we want a somewhat okay metagame, we need to keep mons like Gliscor in, because the reason why mons like Gliscor, defensive Pokemon in general, are things that you typically shouldn't ban, because it opens up a large can of worms that will seep into the metagame as a whole. Because yes, it is a nerf for flying specifically, it doesn't affect ground as much, but when you nerf flying, what happens is that people don't have to respect flying as much in the builder, and if people don't have to respect that type as much in the builder, a known bulky type, then suddenly you don't have to build, you can afford to build a lot more aggressive, and not have to focus as much on stall breaking or having to outbalance the Gliscor team, or have tools to deal with the Gliscor team, which it could be good. It could be good if we get rid of Gliscor, but in my opinion, it's very, very risky to do that, and it takes a lot of time to ban Gliscor as well, because we have to do the suspect test and all that, and then we have to let the metagame, like, settle again, which means we have to wait for another tournament to happen. And if we find that the metagame is worse, do we just unban Gliscor? No, we probably shouldn't do that, but if we inadvertently make the metagame worse by getting rid of a defensive Pokemon, it just has cascading effects on the entire metagame, and it's more than people really realize. That's why when Mega Sableye got banned back in Oraz, it was like a big deal. In OU, not in Monotype. I think it was still a lot of Monotype. Maybe it was, I don't remember. But yeah, Mega Sableye in OU back in Oraz was a big deal to get banned, because it was like one of the few defensive Pokemon that just had to go, because it was just doing that much. It was that impactful. Now I know OU and Monotype aren't really the same, especially when it comes to defensive mons, because obviously Glasscore is only useful on flying and ground teams. Meanwhile, Sableye and OU can be used on any team you want, but still cannot be overstated the amount of value that defensive Pokemon have in the metagame, and how getting rid of them just has a lot of cascading effects on other types and what they have to build. Because think about Poison, for example. Poison suddenly has it has a significantly easier time dealing with flying, but now it can afford to do like more offensive variants as well, which could open up some options for Poison Builder. But what if those options suddenly become extremely impressive, and you open up a whole new can of worms with that? Like I said, Glasscore is just holding down the metagame very well. It is obnoxious, I do agree with that 1000%, it is a really obnoxious mon to deal with, but I truly do think that it needs to stay, because what happens when it leaves could be a lot worse. So, yeah, I think I will just say that for now, Glasscore is, I would say, generally I'm stuck between neutral opinion and generally balanced, because it's not that I wouldn't agree with taking tier reaction. Like, if we truly think that Glasscore is that broken, I'm not going to push against it per se, but I will warn people about what will happen if we do ban it, if that makes sense. So I'm not against the ban, but I'm going to let people know, like, hey, this is what's going to happen if we ban this spawn. Because it is a very risky ban, in my opinion, but I also am totally fine with it going. I don't know. It's really weird for me. So, it's not that I wouldn't support tier reaction. I mean, I definitely wouldn't go and do the suspect test for it, because I just don't feel that way about that mon. I personally don't have a ton of issues with it. It is annoying from time to time, but I don't really find myself super hating the mon when I play. But then again, the types I use typically don't tend to struggle with it, which is very funny because I use a bunch of low tier types lately. So yeah, I don't know. I think I'll just put it as a neutral opinion for now, but yeah. Glasscore is a heavily talked about mon, and I do understand people that want it gone. I understand the arguments completely. Like, I get it. I truly do get why people want this mon gone. But I just personally, knowing and seeing past metagames and seeing what has happened when we have banned defensive Pokemon before, it's really risky to do something like that. So you have to really need to be careful with banning defensive Pokemon specifically. Now, these other mons, most of the other mons actually, are like generally offensive. So Volcaron's going to be a lot much easier to talk about, but yeah, defensive Pokemon just have a very important role in the metagame, and it's way bigger than people realize. But with that being said, I am going to move on to the next one, and that will be Volcarona. So Volcarona is a lot easier for me to answer. I personally think Volcarona is perfectly fine, to be honest, because the thing is, if this were OU we were talking about, it's a much more in-depth discussion. But I personally think that Volcarona has been doing this forever, and it's not like it has Terra and Monotype anyway. If it had Terra, that thing needs to go, absolutely. I wouldn't even entertain the thought of keeping that in the tier. But it doesn't have Terra and Monotype, so it still has to keep its absolutely abhorrent defensive typing. And because it has to keep that absolutely abhorrent defensive typing, his entire team needs to build around that. Now, on Fire, it is typically the same 6 mons that have always been brought, and Volcarona being good is arguably bad for Fire because of the fact that Fire would like to run different mons, but then you don't support one of your best mons really well, and if you don't support Volcarona very well, you're kind of just griefing at that point, right? So it's hard to do variety on Fire with a mon like Volcarona on the team, because Volcarona just does too much for Fire. That being said, I don't think it's unhealthy, because Volcarona has been doing this forever in Monotype. Like, literally since it's been in the game, it's been doing this. Now, granted, Fire hasn't been as strong as it is currently. I think typically Fire tends to be, like, a lower tier type. And it's still like, upper mid tier, I would say, in the current metagame. But Volcarona is just not... Volcarona is typically the reason why Bug and Fire is good, because it just kind of makes the entire type build around it specifically. And it feels like when you don't use it, it's low-key griefing, but Bug this generation... I mean, Volcarona is still really good on Bug this generation, but Bug could actually afford to drop it. Now, not saying that they should, obviously, but you could afford to drop it. In other metagames, you could not, because Volcarona is the only reason that type could ever be playable. But now, you could probably get away with it. At least on ladder and maybe in tournament, but very huge maybe. In fact, I'm genuinely like not 100% sure that a non-Volcarona Bug team could do it on the big stage, but I do think that it is very likely that Volcarona could be dropped on Bug this generation specifically, because Bug just does have a lot of good tools this generation, and the mons that it has access to are actually pretty good. So yeah, Bug is actually in a relatively fine spot, without Volcarona. Well, it'll be significantly worse without it, but I definitely don't think it would be as bad as it has been in other generations had Volcarona been banned in those generations, comparatively. So, yeah. Still not saying that Volcarona should be banned, by the way, but I do think that it is relatively fine. Gonna try not to talk in circles here, but Volcarona, once again, it's just a mod that you have to constantly prep for. It's just, I wouldn't say it's any other offensive threat, because I have seen some extreme edge cases where sometimes Volcarona beats a Heat Train in a 1v1, depending on how many boosts they have. Volcarona just, like, straight up, like, being able to solo entire types, depending on the set that it runs. Like, we've, for example, saw the Fentropy team, where Volcarona just was running a set that could wall and, like, essentially 6-0 the entirety of Dragon if it was put in the right spot. Which, that is absurd. Let's not be fooled. That is absurd. But let's not pretend like other Pokemon in the metagame don't also do somewhat absurd things as well. Like, for example, Ogerpon Hearthflame, who is not on this list this time around. He was on the last survey, but Ogerpon Hearthflame is also doing absurd stuff with the Trailblaze and its Sun-boosted Ivy Cudgel just doing absurd damage in general. And Horn Leech allowing it to, like, drain tank against stuff that it really has no right being able to do that against. But, yeah. Ogerpon Wellspring is also kind of obnoxious, but not as bad as Hearthflame or Volcarona, I would say. But yeah, there's other offensive Pokemon that are just absurd. Tried to think of a couple of others. We have Barraskewda, but Barraskewda is very east of Wall. There's, like... Technically, there's Terapagos, who is actually quite absurd if you don't have a Ghost type. But yeah, I guess part of the issue with Volcarona is that it is relatively hard to wall, because most of the attack that you want to use against Volcarona is physical, but with the Will-O-Wisp sets and it's a bulky investment, it can be kind of hard to do that. And especially with the Sun-boosted Morning Suns, it can just kind of slowly whittle you down and then drain tank you, and then, of course, it could just always switch out if it needs to, because it has heavy-duty boots, so it doesn't need to worry about hazards. Because before, in Gen 7 and 6, you would have to worry about hazards all the time with Volcarona, which is why this degenerate, or quote-unquote degenerate playstyle with Volcarona wasn't really possible. It couldn't afford to run Morning Sun and, like, do this tanky pivot I wouldn't say pivot, but it couldn't do this tanky route. It had to go full offensive because once you got on the field, you wanted to use it as much as possible because you know rocks are going to get set up and you only get one opportunity to get the sweep off. So yeah. Boots are low-key the reason why Volcarona feels oppressive. But with that being said, I do think current fire and bug are both fine right now. I think Volcarona, ironically enough, it shouldn't even be banned because of its effect on the metagame. It should be banned because of how much it constrains fire and bug's building variety. That's my opinion. That's the actual reason I believe it should be banned if we were to ban it. But I don't think that's a real reason personally. But I think that fire and bug are definitely both constrained, at least in a tournament setting, on what you can build because of how good that mon is. But yeah, I think that's basically all I have to say. I think Volcarona is perfectly fine as a mon. Like, every time I lose to it, I do feel like I could have done something better to prevent that from happening. And again, fire and bug are types that aren't super hard to prep for. We saw this in MWP. And now fire did well this time around because people weren't prepping for it actively, but in MWP, we definitely did see what happens when you take fire into account when building. So yeah, I think that fire or Volcarona is probably fine. Would I be against banning it though? Kinda, because it's like my issue with banning stuff in Monotype is that unless I fully agree that it is broken, I wouldn't really say that I would be against people banning it, right? Because, like, I do try to use as many types as possible in Monotype, and I try to expand the amount of types I use. So I try to see a lot of different perspectives, and I just don't really... Like, I don't see... Because I don't really view things as broken, I just see them as things that I need to try and build around and try and get around as much as possible. I don't really... And currently, in this current state of Monotype, I don't feel like that for any of the Pokemon in this metagame. Like, there's certain types that have a hard time against certain types, or certain mons, but that's just the nature of Monotype. I don't really think that's exclusive to those mons. Now, there are exceptions, obviously, that sometimes do crack through, but I personally don't think that any mon currently in this metagame does that. And if I don't feel like any mon does that, just straight up invalidates the type, because, like, Scizor still exists, it's still obnoxious versus Rock and Fairy, but we aren't going to ban it because why would we ban Scizor? Like, it does, like, completely hard beat those two types by itself, on both Steel and Bug, but most people would say that Scizor is probably a healthy Pokemon, right? Now, I'm not saying Volcarona and Scizor are comparable, or even really the same, but it's to put into perspective, like, if one offensive mon is just really good against a certain type, I don't think that that's grounds to ban that mon, in my opinion. Now, Volcarona does do really well into a lot of teams, which is why its fire is still popular in MPL and MWP, but I personally think that in those games, it is just a mixture of all the mons together that are doing what it is. If anything, maybe we need to revisit the Heat Rock thing, but yeah, I definitely don't think Volcarona is the problem. But again, I think I have to say neutral opinion because I just don't think I would tell people actively, like, we don't need to ban Volcarona. If we do it, it's going to be horrible for the metagame. Realistically, if we ban it, it's not going to be that bad, but I just don't see a reason to ban it, right? So, that's how I feel about Volcarona, at least. Alright, next we have, how do you feel about Archelodon in the current SV Monotype metagame? So, Archelodon is also another hotly talked about mon, and this is part of the Double Dragon Steel core. And it's used on both Steel and Dragon as well. Now, Arcaladon is such... It's actually funny, because, okay, so before we get into this ban discussion, I want to talk a little bit about Stamina as an ability, right? So I knew the instant I saw Mudsdale in Gen 7, when I saw the Stamina ability and I saw how hard it made it to deal with, I was just like, if a good Pokemon gets this ability, it will be oppressive to deal with. And now here we are. A good Pokemon finally got the ability, and people are having a huge issue with it because of that. Because, like, multi-hit moves like Triple Axle that you would normally use to try and get through, like, a strong neutral hit, now you're actively punished by doing that. And stuff like a whiffed Bullet Seed, for example, or a whiffed Rock Blast on maybe another mon, or an Icicle Spear even. Yeah, that's going to be problematic for you as well, and it learns Body Press as well, so you're actively making it stronger by doing that. So, yeah, Arcaladon is just... He is just what happens when you give Stamina to an actually good Pokemon. And thankfully, he doesn't have instant recovery. Yeah. That's pretty much all I can say, though. It is definitely an oppressive mon. And I do think that something absolutely needs to be done about the Double Steel Dragon Core. Because even though, once again, if we go back to the MPL sheet, Dragon... Okay, well, for whatever reason, this is still getting updated. I don't know why every single time I make a video, this sheet is getting updated. But, yeah. Dragon didn't do, like, crazy good. And, like, look at the amount of games that Dragon has, first of all. And look at its win rate. Like, Dragon just has an obscene amount of games compared to every other type in the tournament. And Dragon is just, like... It's still being brought, and even if it does not perform well every single time, it still does well in most of its matchups. It just feels like too safe of a type to really like mess up on entirely. And it's mainly because it's the solid 3 mons on the type. It's Arcaladon, Suian Gudra, and Dragapult. Those 3 mons just completely control how the type works, and then you just have like 3 other slots to do whatever. Now, this is not completely unusual, right? If you have a strong core, you're gonna build around that core. This is not new to Monotype. This has happened multiple times, and a lot of lower tier types also tend to struggle, or not struggle per se, but tend to follow this principle a lot as well. You just follow a core, and then you insert whatever mods you think will help you support that core as much as possible. The thing is, with Arcaladon specifically, Arcaladon is basically the physical end of the spectrum, while Hisuian Gudra is the special end of the spectrum. Arcaladon actively gets stronger the more you hit it, while Hisuian Gudra does not. And I think that's the issue that Arcaladon has with a lot of the player base. A lot of the player base just does not like a wall that just tanks whatever you can do, and then actively gets stronger for you trying to hit it. Like, that definitely feels terrible. And add on the fact that it learns Thunder Wave, and Flash Cannon, and Body Press, and it can also potentially be Choice Scarf as well. We have seen that in MPL. A lot of people said that set is not viable. We've literally seen it multiple times in MPL at this point, so I definitely think people still do bring it, and it is a relevant set to discuss. But Arcaladon is just... It's just inherently a frustrating Pokemon to deal with, and like I said, I do think something needs to be done about the Double Steel Core, because even though we've said it multiple times on this channel that Dragon's biggest weakness is the fact that it lacks hazard removal, because it still doesn't have any hazard removal, but you have to think about it, right? If Dragon is being used as much as it is, and it has that weakness against the hazard stack metagame that we have, how on earth is it the most used type? And it's still doing well, despite the fact that this is an arguably exploitable weakness. And part of that reason is because the type is just really, really solid. It's just too damn good at its job. And it's really hard to really know if that is healthy or not. Because, in my opinion, I think that might just not be healthy. But again, and I said this before with Gliscor, so I'm going to try not to reiterate too much, but if you ban a defensive Pokemon, it has a lot of ramifications on the entire metagame. Now, Archaludon is a little bit different than Gliscor, granted, because Archaludon isn't really that big of a wall. It's more of like a, it's like a, I don't really know how to describe it, but it's like a bruiser-ish kind of mon. It doesn't really, like, it does wall, but it's not, like, Gliscor level walling, right? It's kind of just sitting there and taking a couple of hits, getting some progress done, and then getting out. It's kind of like Ting-Lu, because both of them lack recovery, but they're just incredibly tanky and hard to break through. Meanwhile, stuff like Gliscor is actively healing itself a lot. Stuff like Gliscor, Toxapex, Slow King, or Glow King. Like, those mons actively heal themselves a lot, and to keep themselves in the fight. And then also try to make progress like that. Archaludon and mons like it are typically the more frustrating mons to deal with because they're hard to break through and they just feel immovable with how bulky they are. And they also just make a lot of progress. So the difference between Archaludon and Ting-Lu, though, is that Archaludon, once again, gets stronger the more you hit it, and that aspect of it is just really hard to deal with. So yeah, I'm trying not to talk too much in circles, because the issue really is just stamina, and if I were to pick anything that was broken about Archaludon, I think it is just stamina. It's not anything else about it. Because obviously, the typing, really good, its bulkiness is also really good, but the main thing that makes this mon just so oppressive to deal with is the fact that it has stamina. But we are, as a metagame, we do not try to do complex bans. So, unfortunately, we can't just ban the combination of Archaludon and Stamina. We would have to ban Stamina as an ability as a whole, and obviously Mudsdale is not a good Pokemon, so that's probably not going to happen, because you have to prove that it's broken on everyone, and obviously every Pokemon that gets Stamina is not broken. Like I said, Mudsdale is not broken, so it's really difficult to figure out whether or not what to really do about the double Steel Dragon Core, because something definitely should be done, because Dragon should not be as good as it is in this metagame specifically, with the weakness that it has. It just should not be this good. But yeah, I really don't know what to say about this one, because it definitely is not healthy, or it's the thing that it's supporting isn't healthy, but I have no idea what you can really do, because if you ban it, you're going to have the bad ramifications that I talked about with Gliscor, where suddenly, like, a ton of options blow up, and Dragon might not suffer a ton from losing Archaludon. Well, it actually will. It will absolutely lose a ton from losing Archaludon, because now it doesn't have, like, that super good defensive core that it once had. Now it has to try and replace it with something else, and Archaludon's kind of irreplaceable on Dragon, which is why it's pretty much used on every single Dragon team. Actually, we can look and see, but yeah, Archaludon, literally 100% usage. Like, this mon is integral, like, absolutely necessary for the success of this type. So, it's no joke that Archaludon is, like, a big deal for the type to deal with, but it's just really hard to say that it needs to get banned, or that it should get banned, because of what it means for the rest of the metagame, because it doesn't just affect Dragon, once again, it also affects Steel somewhat. Because now Steel loses another fire neutrality, and they have to... And even though they do have Heatran, having a fire neutrality is just generally nice, because Heatran is something that is easily baitable, and something that can very easily be worn down, or trapped, or all sorts of other stuff. People will be doing evil stuff to Heatran all the time. It's been a thing forever. But having something else that can switch into those fire moves is very good to have. Which is why Empoleon sometimes sees usage on Steel. And we also, of course, see Hisui and Gudra on steel as well. Archaladon is also used on steel, not nearly as much. Pretty sure it does still get used, I'm pretty sure, but it's definitely, like... Oh, it's not, it wasn't even used. Oh, never mind, it is used. But yeah, it is used on every single steel team, but I wouldn't say the effect that it has on steel is anywhere near the amount of effect that it has on a dragon. It's still really good on steel, don't get me wrong. It's still very good, but it's definitely nowhere near the effect that it has on dragon. Because if you remove Archaladon from steel, steel can, like, kind of get over it, because it's just a generally very solid type, and it always has been. I mean, losing Archaladon will still be a blow to its viability for sure, but steel will be okay, but dragon will be absolutely, like, scrounging for scraps, because now they have to replace a hazard setter, a physically defensive mon, and they just don't really have something like that to really fall back on. Steel can kind of, like, maybe replace it with, like, Skarmory coming up constantly, because Skarmory learns spikes and Stealth Rock. It also has Body Press. Doesn't have Thunder Wave, and it doesn't have Stamina, but... And its typing isn't insane either, but as a physical wall, it still has something... It still offers something to the team that it can use. But Dragon doesn't have them on to really do that, because they have a Hazard Setter in Garchomp, but Garchomp is just not really good defensively. Because there are the Tank Chomp sets, but obviously they are very susceptible to getting either blown up by a really strong Fairy type attack, or they can just get one shot by an Ice type move still, even through its defenses. So yeah, it's really rough. It's really rough, and I do think something needs to be done about it. Something needs to be done. But I truly don't think Archaladon is super broken, but it is definitely one of the most frustrating. It influences a really powerful strategy, and I think something needs to be done about that strategy. And if banning it is what is necessary, then I wouldn't be against banning it. So I would say maybe Archaladon is generally unbalanced. This is with a massive asterisk, but that's the only thing I would definitely say. Because I don't personally think it's unbalanced, but I do think that the fact Dragon is as good as it is, and it doesn't need to change its archetype that much, or really, like, lose anything. Because the fact that Dragon teams aren't, like, scrounging for Noivern to even be viable on the type, and it just raw takes the spikes damage and still wins through that. I think the fact that Dragon can do that and it still gets picked as much as it does in MPL, I think that means something is particularly disgusting about the type. So yeah, perhaps something needs to be done about that. And in the past, I've said that Archaladon was fine before, and that it wasn't that big of a deal, but I think after MPL, I've really begun to understand, like, what this mon is actually doing. So yeah, I will put this as my answer. This is the only thing I may not stay neutral on, because something absolutely does need to be done about what Dragon is doing in the current metagame. I personally think that is not healthy currently, even though it still seems balanced. Like, we can look at the stat sheet again, even though it's being currently updated. Like, Dragon's games are it's like overwhelmingly popular type, but the win rate is, like, somewhat okay. And it's, like, under 50%, right? So it's not winning every single game, because it would be one thing if Dragon was overperforming every game and it was just winning every game, and Archaladon was just soloing entire types and stuff like that. That would be a completely different story. I would obviously not be as torn about getting rid of the mon. But yeah, once again, with the aspect of banning a defensive Pokemon and the aspect they have on the metagame, and also just a bunch of other stuff, if anything has to go on this list, it's absolutely Archaladon. Spoilers for Goldengo, by the way. But yeah, Archaladon is just, I don't know, man. It's just a really, really rough mon to get around. And I do think it's probably the more broken thing on the defensive core of Dragon. So yeah, I've went on long enough about him, so let's go move on to Goldengo. and Goldengo is... We have this conversation a lot on the Monotype chat room, but I'll just say my opinion on this now. I don't think Goldengo's broken. I don't think it needs to go. I actively do not like fighting that mon, but I don't think it's broken. I think Goldengo is just one of those Swiss Army knife mons that just kind of does a lot of stuff at the same time, but it doesn't excel at anything. And that is the core thing, right? It's not the super mon. It doesn't do everything, but it also doesn't excel really well at anything, because it's a good utility mon, but it's not the best utility mon, because it lacks hazards. It's good at being like a switch-in to certain stuff, but it's not like the best switch-in for Ghost ever, right? Because it's not like Aegislash in the past, where it could just afford to like wall certain stuff, and then just hit back with like a ton of bricks. Like, Goldengo can't do that. It's arguably a more balanced version of that. Now, good as gold, obviously this is a frustrating ability, and not being able to use Defog or Rapid Spin against this thing is very annoying, I agree. What I don't agree with, though, is that good as gold invalidating stuff like Trick, Taunt, and other stuff. I think it's fine. I really do think it's fine. It's a really strong ability, don't get me wrong, but I don't think that ability is that obscenely broken. Because it doesn't really make it so that... Because think about Arcaldon, right? Arcaldon is a mon that you want to try and break through, and sometimes you just don't have a special attacker, so you need to use a physical attacker, and you actively get punished for hitting Arcaldon, right? With a physical mon. Like, imagine you have a Curum and you don't have Ice Beam, you're instead a physical set with Icicle Crash, or Icicle... Actually, it doesn't have Icicle Crash, it only has Icicle Spear. You only have Icicle Spear as your main stab option, you're like +2, and you think that you can maybe kill it, and then you don't because of stamina? Like, that's a problem, right? But with Goldengo, Goldengo's ability doesn't make it harder for you to actually deal with the mon. Like, yes, you can't do any of the trick stuff to it, and you can't do any of the... You can't do any of the stall breaking stuff to it, or prevent it from using Thunder Wave and stuff like that, but at the same time, it's not stopping you from being able to defeat it with offensive moves. And it's not stopping you from being able to get stuff like hazards down. If Good as Gold stopped you from putting down hazards, or just using status moves to like clear anything and stuff like that, that would be problematic. Like, if it was stopping Haze, for example, or if it was stopping, it does stop Whirlwind, but yeah, it just generally is not as problematic as I think people make it out to be. Now, it is annoying. It is an obscenely annoying mon, don't get me wrong. But I think of Goldengo as like a slightly more viable version of Sableye, where it's like, it's an obnoxious mon, but it's not, what it's doing is just not broken, right? Like, what Goldengo is doing is literally balanced, I would say. It's actually a balanced mon, in my opinion. And I definitely think I would actually try to fight against people who use this. Once again, hate dealing with this mon. Absolutely cannot stand dealing with this mon. But I think it is balanced. I really don't think it's that broken. Now, obviously, the more offensive sets are actually where problems may arise a little bit, because it's still not the best offensive mon, let's just get that straight. Because on Ghost, forget about it. It's literally outclassed by Spectrier, and it's not close. Fluttermane as well. And on Steel, now Steel does have less special attackers, so it is probably the best special attacker Steel has. But again, on Steel, I don't think it's anywhere near as bad, because it does create the immunity core on Steel, which we've had in the past with Aegislash. But the difference between Goldengo and Aegislash is that Aegislash was able to use King Shield and just completely just do two things at once, essentially. It could be a tank and it could be a strong offensive threat at the same time. That's kind of obnoxious to deal with, right? But Goldengo doesn't do that. It just stops you from using your passive moves on it. And comparatively, if Goldengo wants to do... Goldengo can't do what Aegislash did, essentially. Because, yes, you can argue, like, oh, the Thunder Wave, Nasty Plot, Hex set with Recover, that could be really annoying, okay, but then it gets walled by a normal type, or it can't get off that Thunder Wave against either a ground or electric type, so it just becomes dead weight in that regard. Oh, but you can just put status on the other bonds. Yeah, you can do that, but again, that means you have to have Team Support for Gholdengo. XII was just doing this by itself. Now, I know it's not fair to compare the two mods, even though they have the same typing, because they do different things, but like I said, XII was just does too much, generally, on its own. While Gholdengo still needs the support of its team, and it's actively a support for its team most of the time. Because it can run the Choice Scarf sets, but it's not the best Choice Scarfer, right? Even on Steel. It is one of Steel's best special attackers. I will not, argue that. That is definitely one of its best qualities. But at the same time, it's not what Aegislash was before. It is not doing everything. It can't just tank stuff for fun, and then also just one-shot things in return. It's not doing that, and because it's not doing that, I'd say it's fine, personally. Now, granted, yes, trying to figure out what the Gholdengo set is in the middle of the game, that could be annoying, but we've had multiple Pokemon like this before. We literally have Heatran, who can sometimes be... We've seen quite a few sets on Heatran in the past. We've seen Leftovers, we've seen some people use Assault Vest, we've seen some people use Choice Scarf even. But yeah, having to guess what a set is just a natural part of Pokemon. And I don't really think Gholdengo does anything obscene with any of its sets. It's just doing those sets, but it added an maybe slightly above average level. And I don't think that's broken, personally. As long as it isn't super excelling at a certain set, if Gholdengo was running one set that was really, really good, and everybody was using that set, maybe I could argue that I would support tiering action, or I wouldn't stop people from wanting to ban this mod. But it's not doing that. So, yeah, I think Gholdengo is only... And I think with the Steel comparison, I think Gholdengo may only be as obnoxious as it is because it is, the thing that stops Steel from having to deal with a lot of hazards, or has removal from the enemy team. But, yeah, no, Gholdengo is just... I just think it's perfectly fine. I would actively fight against people trying to ban this thing. Because I just don't think it's that broken. I really just don't think it's that broken. And this is coming from someone who actively hates dealing with it, by the way. I play, playing Psychic against that mon, very obnoxious. Playing Normal against that mon, extremely obnoxious. But I just don't think it's that broken, personally. Alright, obviously these two are going to be a big fat no, because I did not do any of that. I didn't get top 50. I think at best I might have gotten, top 100 when I was doing my normal team run, so I'd have to check back on that. Maybe I did or didn't reach top 100, I actually don't know, but yeah, I'm not top 50 at all right now. Did not answer yes, and is there anything mentioned that I'd like the council to look into? So, like I said before, something definitely needs to be done about Dragon. Which, it's actually funny, because you would think, after MPL, that Dark is the thing that needs to be looked at, but Dark is just fine, I think. Because, yeah, Meowscarada's a really annoying Pokemon, but it's also still carried by Protean, if that makes sense. And a Protean nerf just makes it way harder for Meowscarada to be as obnoxious as it could be. So, I do think Meowscarada is kind of annoying, and its speed tier is really good, and makes certain types struggle to deal with it a little. But that's just no different from any other strong Choice Scarfer. Fluttermane is doing the exact same thing right now, and it's not on this list. It was on the last list, I think, though. But yeah, it's not even on this list, so that just goes to show, Fluttermane is probably okay right now, and it's mainly the fact that Steel and Dragon are just way too good with their types. And their counterplay to that mon, so yeah. Something needs to be done about Dragon, though, for sure. I don't know what it needs to be, but something has to be done. And no, I'm not even going to entertain type ban either, because, yeah, that's just dumb. But what I will say is maybe we could look at Heat Rock again. Because if we feel like Volcarona is that broken, I think what we need to look at is Heat Rock and not Volcarona, personally. Because Heat Rock is the reason why the bulky Volcarona sets can work really well, because it just has enough turns to utilize that Morning Sun, and if you can't contest that weather, there's not really much you can do about it. It just kind of just has a 67% health heal that you can just use at any time. And it's really annoying. So, yeah. But yeah, maybe we can look at Heat Rock again, but maybe it's a waste of time, I don't know. Any other bonds that I think are broken, though? If Ghost was a better type, I'd say maybe look at Spectrier, but Ghost is not that broken. So, yeah, Spectrier is probably fine for now. Funny enough, it is banned in NDM, but yeah. NDM is not current gen mono, so that is irrelevant. I can't really think of much more that I would say is potentially broken in this metagame. So I guess we can go and answer the other questions. So, how enjoyable did I find the metagame? I think this metagame is... So, here's the thing with mods, and this has been a thing for a while, right? Every single generation we have the same discussion. Is Mons dying? Is Mons, like, getting stale? Is this game boring? Like, should I just do something else? This happens every single time, because we are very unique in the competitive gaming sphere, where we do not get patches. With the exception of Pokemon Champions, which has only recently come out, we do not get patches, typically. Like, maybe we'll get a bug fix here or there, or maybe someone will discover a certain interaction didn't work the same way it did. For example, the metronome interaction back in Gen 7, we figured out that it doesn't stay stacked if someone uses Protect. So, that was like that's probably like the biggest patch, quote-unquote, that we've ever gotten. We don't get patches, though. We have to wait for entire games to release before we get any sort of updates. And because of that, we're just left to, like, figure out the metagame for ourselves. And a lot of people just don't find that exciting. It's the reason why a lot of people don't play older fighting games. It's why they don't play older games in general, is because those metagames, especially if they're not getting updated, they just feel solved, and then they just get bored and just want to quit immediately. And this is something we've been struggling with forever. Even before my time, people have been dealing with the same thing. When a metagame goes on for as long as this, and nothing new happens, it's just really, really annoying to deal with. Which is, low-key, why the DLCs were kind of probably the best thing to happen for competitive mods, because it at least gave us something to look forward to and not have to wait like another couple of years for another big game to come out. But, yeah. I would definitely say that the metagame is just in its late game stage, I would say. It's fun enough for me, and I know a lot of people don't really enjoy this metagame because of how strong certain mods are in the metagame, but I feel like this is just something that really cannot be tackled without going absolutely berserk with banning a bunch of crazy stuff, and at that point it just doesn't even feel like we're playing the game. Right? Because if we ban too much stuff, it just doesn't really feel like we're playing mods at that point. It just feels like we're playing like a ban list. And the thing with Monotype is that I've always liked Monotype because it has like a large variety of mods. You can just use them in different ways that you would never think to use them before. Certain mods that are typically not good in standard play are just really good in Monotype. Like Hisui and Guja, for example, just isn't that good in standard play, but it's super, super good on Monotype. Like, being able to use mods like that is very interesting. But it also comes with the caveat of super strong mods that are typically banned in stuff like OU are now allowed because they're on types that are typically not that strong or can't support it as well, like Fluttermane, for example. So, yeah, it's just tough. I don't really know how else I can say it, but it's just really hard for you to go with the current metagame, to see the current metagame and just be like, yeah, this is like the best metagame I've ever played. Because a lot of people talk about Sun and Moon being one of the best metagames ever, and that's mainly because I think a lot of the Pokemon were available. Because you had every single Pokemon available, there's a lot more options. We don't have nearly as many options in SV. Because we don't have every single Pokemon. We have a lot, we don't have them all, though. And I truthfully do believe if we had all of them, the metagame will probably be a little bit better. But as NDM has shown, even that doesn't solve everything, so yeah, I don't know. It's really, really tough, though. But yeah, I personally am enjoying this metagame a lot, though. Like, playing the metagame does feel great when I'm using teams that I actually like using. But like playing meta in this game, if you only want to win and you only play meta, I would probably say this metagame is probably a 6 for you. But for me personally, who likes using unconventional teams and just likes having a good old time, I'd say it's an 8. Which is strange because a lot of people who play like me and have the mindset as me don't really enjoy this metagame because they feel like they're being constrained by certain types. But I personally feel like sometimes a bunch you just have to take trade-offs. And I realized this when I was maining fighting back in Gen 7 and 8. Like, sometimes you just have to, like, accept that you just won't win certain matchups. And all you can do is just really pray for luck or pray that your opponent messes up. Like, some matchups you just don't win as that type. And I think that's fine. Like, if there's a type that was winning against every single type, that would be broken, right? Like, some types just should be able to, like, hard lose to other types. I think that's perfectly fine, because Pokemon wasn't made with monotype in mind, so some types are just generally going to have a harder time dealing with certain strategies and certain types than other types, because they weren't made to be put against each other like this. And the fact that we even have a somewhat balanced metagame in general is honestly kind of amazing. So yeah, I personally think that the metagame is fun, but I understand why a lot of people do not like it. And you are totally valid in thinking that as well. Alright, and for how competitive and balanced I find the current metagame, so once again, I'll put this at a 7. I personally think it is almost there. I think something needs to be done about Dragon, though, so yeah. I do think it's still a very competitive metagame, because look at MPL, only 3 types weren't used this time around. Actually, no, Psychic was used. So that's not true. So it's only 2 types that weren't used. And I would still say, like, every type had a good showing in this tournament of what it could do. So, yeah, I definitely think that competitively, it seems fun, in my opinion. Even though I've heard a lot from the players that it's not that great. I've watched all the MPL games. Now, obviously, I'm not building for MPL games, so that's definitely a perspective I don't understand yet. But as someone who's watching the MPL games, and as someone who does build teams on the ladder and does somewhat decently, I personally think that the metagame is fine. And I think it is relatively balanced. Now, the way it is balanced, maybe it's not satisfying to a lot of people, maybe the power level is a bit too high. I can understand that, totally. But for me, it is definitely a 7. I do think something needs to be done about Dragon, though. Because Dragon should not be able to do what it does right now. But yeah, that'll be it. I talked a lot for a tiering survey, and this is the exact reason why I didn't want to mix this with my normal video. But yeah, the normal video, I'm not sure if I'll do it on Tuesday. It actually might be too busy for Tuesday, so maybe it'll come out next week. We'll see how that goes, though. Maybe I'll end up doing a response video to however the survey results end up being, but yeah. Yeah, thank you for listening to me rant about this. I will now submit this tiering survey, and that will be it. Alright, everyone, have a great, great day. And remember to take care of yourself as well.